This is segment 2 of 3 for our missed class on February 2nd. In this segment, we will go over books 18 and 19 from the Odyssey. As you may recall, at the end of book 17, we left Odysseus. He had returned to his own palace, but under the guise of a beggar. And he had come into the room, and most of the suitors were kind and gave him some food, but things didn't go so well with a character named Antinous, who was one of Penelope's suitors. So now as he's at this daily feast that they're having, along comes another beggar whose name is Aeneas, and he's called Iris for short. Iris is used to being the beggar, and he typically hangs out on the porch. So he's pretty annoyed when he sees another beggar taking his spot. I don't know if this will be in your experience, but if you see beggars on the street, they actually do have a sense of territory. There are some spots that are really good for begging. For example, near an entrance to a subway, you get a lot of people coming there every day on their way to work, and they stop and drop some money in your hat or your box or whatever you have. So you have quite a lot of constant crowd, people who become familiar with you, and that's a really good spot. Another spot might be near a restaurant where people might bring some food out to you, or near a church where people are feeling particularly generous. So Iris is used to being at the palace where there's this feast going on every day and there's a lot of food, and people will slip him a little bit, maybe from their plate or maybe from what's left over, but he's used to this. And he's the guy who's supposed to be there, at least in his head. So to him, it's a zero-sum game. Every morsel of food they give to Odysseus is food that they're not going to be giving to him. And he doesn't like that a whole heck of a lot. So he challenges Odysseus. He doesn't know who this is. Listen, beggar buddy, what are you doing here? So one thing leads to another. Words are exchanged, and these are men, right? So they decide that they're going to duke it out. So Odysseus rolls up. He's wearing kind of raggy clothes, and they're kind of shredded. So he rolls up his sleeves, and he rolls up the bottom of his skirt, and so now his bristling muscles are showing. And Athena, of course, makes him look even more buff. And Odysseus punches the guy and knocks him out with one blow. So why did Athena want this to happen? Isn't that interesting? She could have stopped the fight, or she could have whispered to Odysseus, hey, just let her go. Why did she want this fight to happen? And I can think of two reasons. One is that she wants to intimidate the suitors a little bit. When he exposes his muscles and shows just how strong he is, that might inspire a little fear later on when we come to our battle scene. Another reason, for those of you who are male, you will know this, when you get riled up, that adrenaline comes pumping, the testosterone comes pumping, she's getting him into fight mode because he's going to be fighting for his life pretty soon. So she's giving him that chemical rush he needs that will give him an advantage when it comes down to the battle. The battle, you can feel it coming, right? Then she's not done. She now inspires she inspires Penelope to come on down and appear before the suitors. She makes Penelope look really good. So Penelope comes down the stairs. She's a vision of beauty. The suitors see her. Their hearts are filled with lust. And oh man, every suitor wants her. Why would Athena do that? It's not to Odysseus's advantage. But when you think about it, Athena is the goddess of battle, and I think she just wants a good fight. So just as she got Odysseus riled up, now she's getting the suitors riled up. She's going to have a little bit too much fun here, I think. Penelope, we can see, has changed a little bit, and I believe that this is a result of the fact that her son has come back safely, so she's greatly relieved. But she's also recognized that there's a change in Telemachus. He's ready to assume his rightful role as king of Ithaca. She doesn't know that Odysseus is here, that he's alive, and so she assumes that her son is now going to take his rightful place. That means that her calculus has changed. Before, she had to protect him and be the mom. She put up with a lot from the suitors, really to protect Telemachus, and because she didn't have a lot of options. Now that he's beginning to stand up for himself, she doesn't have to be quite so quiet and so accepting of them. So when she's speaking to the suitors, she says to them, you know, my husband Odysseus told me that he might die in Troy. And he made me promise that when the hair appears on Telemachus' face, that I would choose another man and remarry. You can sort of hear in her voice that this is something she doesn't really want to do, but she's telling him that the time has come. And she tells them, I have to make good on my promise. And here's where she gets to be really interesting. She says to the suitors, you know, you guys are not acting like normal suitors. Let's put this in today's context. If a guy wants to get a girl's attention, does he go and take her stuff? I would think not. It's more likely that he'll bring her little gifts. And if you're a college student, okay, you can't afford a bouquet of roses, but you might bring a flower, or you might bring a candy bar, or some little trinket. You want the woman to know that you value her, and you give her something as a sign that you spent a little money, you value her. These suitors are doing the opposite. They're taking her stuff. So in effect, what they're saying is, we only want you for your possessions. What Penelope is finally saying to them, after 3 years of being harassed by these men, is, hey, you guys should be giving me stuff. If you want to be my husband, you should be courting me, not stealing from me. So they all kind of go, oh, yeah, she's got a point. So they all send their servants home, and of course now they're going to try to outdo one another. And you know, somebody's going to bring her fancy candlesticks, and somebody else is going to bring her jewelry, and somebody's going to bring her a silver platter, and she's finally going to rake in some advantage from all this torture these suitors have heaped upon her. When the gifts arrive, Penelope, I just love this, she has them all hauled up to her chamber. She's just taken the loot. If I have to put up with these guys, I'm going to get something out of it. Meanwhile, Athena now whips up the suitors to insult Odysseus more. Again, she's trying to, the text says, make his anguish deeper, but what she's trying to do is get him riled up so that he's really, really angry when he goes into battle, so that he will have that adrenaline rush that he needs to be successful. Telemachus now shows that he's getting to be the man. He speaks up and he tells the suitors, listen, the food and wine has gone to your heads. Time for you to go home to bed. And they're kind of impressed with him. It's important that he gets rid of them because they have to set the scene. They have to get ready for the battle the next day. The text tells us that Odysseus and Telemachus then in book 19 take all of the weapons out of the hall. To understand this, we have to think about what a banquet hall would look like in those days. They may have had some paintings, but the main way to decorate in those days in the castle of a warrior king was to display the trophies of war, just like a hunter might display the head of an animal that he or she has killed. They would display the weapons of the people they conquered. So they might have lances, spears, swords, shields, things that they took from the people that they conquered would be placed on the walls as a sort of decoration. So what's the problem with that? Well, when we go to battle, you know the suitors are just going to turn around and pull those weapons off the wall and use them to kill us. So we need to get rid of them. So they take them off to a storeroom. Before this happens, or as it's going on, one of the servant women sees Odysseus hanging around. And remember, she just thinks he's a beggar. He shouldn't be in the house at this point when everyone else has gone home. There would be a concern that the beggar is stealing or sneaking around and doing things that he shouldn't be doing. So the beggar woman lays into him and says, hey, you beggar, get the heck out of here. Penelope overhears this and says to the woman, I'm aware of your ugly work, and you will pay for it with your life. This is significant because it shows us that Penelope is not unaware that some of the servants have turned against us. Remember that it was some of her own handmaidens who turned her over to the suitors, or ratted her out to the suitors when she was doing her little weaving and unraveling trick. So she's now indicating that I know some of you servants are against me, and I know who at least some of you bad girls are. So at this point, Penelope is now going to have her little private tete-a-tete with Odysseus. Remember, she said that she wanted to talk to him privately because she believed his story that he had fought in the Trojan War, and she thinks that he might have some information about her missing husband. He lies to her when she asks him who he is, and he says he's Aethon of Crete. So the next question is, why does he lie? Why didn't he just say to Penelope, "Hey, it's me, your husband, your long-lost husband"? Why doesn't he reveal himself? If you think about it, there are two dangers. One is that there are servants hanging around, and we know that some of them are bad servants. So someone might overhear him telling Penelope, and he might, and that would put him in danger because then the suitors would find out. The other reason is that Penelope probably would not be able to control her emotions. Even if she agreed to keep it a secret, and even if she didn't cry out with surprise and be overheard, which is likely, she would be changed. She would be happy. And everyone's used to her being tragic, weeping all the time, going around in a very morose mindset. So if she suddenly appeared to be happy, she would be ecstatic. They would know that something was up, and they might suspect that she'd heard word that Odysseus was alive, if not in her house. So it's to protect himself and to give himself the advantage in battle that he doesn't tell his wife. Odysseus is a big fat liar, and I really don't like the fact that he's lying all the time. But in this case, I think it actually does make sense. So Penelope predictably begins weeping as he talks about having been at Troy. I think it's kind of cute. She calls Troy destroy. A great little pun there that has translated very well by our translator, Robert Fagel. Anyway, Odysseus tells Penelope that Odysseus is coming home soon. She obviously doesn't believe him. One of the things she says during their conversation is very important to us in terms of the mindset and the responsibilities in ancient Greek society. She's talking about the fact that she's going to provide for him. She's going to give him clothing. She's going to allow him to have a bath. And she says, if a man is cruel by nature, the mortal world will curse him when he's alive and mock his memory after death. You have to understand that we visited the House of the Dead, and in Greek society, ancient Greek society, that afterlife existence was really grim. So the only way that you could really be immortal is through the memory the people had of you. If you saw the movie Troy, you may remember that Achilles, the character Achilles, kept saying to people, if they weren't willing to step up to the fight, he would say, "Your name will not be remembered." So it was very important to be revered and remembered as a good person or as a strong person or as a heroic person. That was the only form of real immortality that they had. So that was important. And Penelope wanted to be remembered as a queen who had been very kind. So since she has offered him a bath, only an old woman could bathe him because a young woman might be interested in his body. So enter our favorite old nurse, Eurycleia. She comes along, and she's the one who's given the job of bathing him. So as she's washing his feet, she notices a wound, a scar that he has, and she recognizes this because she remembers when young Odysseus suffered this wound, which we'll talk about in a minute. Odysseus is not very kind when she recognizes him and says, "Oh my gosh, Odysseus, it's you." He threatens her. And I'm going to read what he says to her. This is page 406, starting at line 550. He says, "Quiet! Not a word to anyone in the house, or else, I warn you, and I mean business too, if a god beats down these brazen suitors at my hands, I will not spare you, my old nurse that you are, when I kill the other women in this house. So he's threatening her with death. And that tells us something pretty important about Odysseus' character. This is an old woman who's crying with delight because she loves him and because she's moved to tears at the fact that he's alive when she thought he was dead. And his response is, shut up or I'll kill you. He could easily have said, quiet, you will endanger my life. And that would bring home with her. She wants to save him. But instead he threatens her with death. So that tells us about what his mindset is and about his idea of compassion. Now let's take a look at the backstory of how he got this wound. He got it at his grandfather's house. And you may remember I mentioned that according to some versions of the myth, the grandfather was the son of Hermes. In this text, he's not the son of Hermes, but he's actually very close to Hermes. And what's interesting is that Hermes liked him very much because he offered a lot of sacrifices. He was very generous in his sacrifices to Hermes. And Hermes is described on lines 446 through 452 as his ready partner in crimes. Odysseus' grandfather was a thief, and he also swindled people. So we can see that Odysseus, although he's supposed to be the great warrior, hero, king, he has a little bit of smarminess in his life history. Now that's not genetic, but you might question whether he might have been influenced to some degree by hanging out with Grandpa, or if some of Grandpa's habits passed down to his father. So although he's supposed to be very noble and very strong, and certainly is true to his word, this whole thing about lying could in fact go back to his grandfather, and that his sense of morality it could have come down through, if not nature, certainly nurture. It also shows us that Hermes, although he's the messenger god and his job is to deliver whatever message Zeus tells him to, he also has a kind of sideline. So he too, although a working god, has his own friends and his own people that he favors. He doesn't necessarily favor people who are doing good things. In this case, he's favoring somebody and helping him to do sort of illicit deeds. Now I want to take a look at what Penelope says after all of this has transpired, and she doesn't know. She has not been privy to this little side conversation between Odysseus and the nurse, so she still doesn't know that the man she's talking to is her husband. She's talking to him, she's confiding, which is kind of weird since she's just met him, but one could argue that their hearts beat together and they're still attracted to each other. So she trusts him with her story, and she's talking to him about her dilemma regarding whether she should remarry or not. And here's what she says. Do I stay beside my son and keep all things secure, my lands, my serving women, the grand high-roofed house, true to my husband's bed, the people's voice as well? Or do I follow at last the best man who courts me here in the halls, who gives me the greatest gifts? My son, when he was a boy and light-hearted, urged me not to marry and leave my husband's house. But now he has grown and reached his young prime. He begs me to leave our palace and travel home. Telemachus, so obsessed with his own estate, the wealth my princely suitors lead away. I want to stop and take a look at what Penelope's dilemma really looks like and what her calculus is. So first we're going to look at the question of why she should remarry. And there are several reasons. One is that she promised Telemachus in the earlier passage that I read. He made her promise that when Telemachus came of age, when the beard appears on his face, promise me that you will remarry. As a queen, she has to be true to her word. So that would be an argument for, yes, it's time. Telemachus has come of age. It's time for me to remarry because I promised. The second is that Telemachus will inherit. She believes Odysseus to be dead, so now if I step aside, if I marry, I will leave the house. I won't let my suitor rule. I will let Telemachus come up, he will become king, and I will leave and go off-site with my new husband. So Telemachus will inherit. She also thinks that Telemachus wants this. You heard it in the text just now, that he's concerned. She thinks that he's concerned about the estate, that he wants to inherit, and that she would be doing him a favor. I think she's wrong about that, but she has heard him talk to the suitors about how they're bleeding the wealth away, and she's misinterpreted. He's actually concerned for his mother. It's her wealth that's being bled away, but she misinterprets it as Telemachus wants the goods. And so the sooner I get these guys out of the palace, the more that will be left for Telemachus. And the only way for her to get these guys out of the palace, she's not going to go to battle with them. So the only way is to marry one of them, and then all the suitors will leave. So that would preserve his inheritance. And then finally, that's the whole point, is that it preserves the family's wealth, whether for him or for herself. So those are arguments why she would do it. She also talks about, in the passage that we just read, about not wanting to do it. One of the things she says is that she wants to remain true to my husband's bed. So she's talking about fidelity. She loves Odysseus, and she thinks there's a chance he could still be alive. She's not giving up hope. So to marry when I think my husband might be alive still, plus, even if he's dead, maybe I want to be true to his memory. No man could ever replace my dear Odysseus. No man could ever be like him. I can't accept some other man. So in her heart, she doesn't really want to remarry. Frankly, the men she has to choose from, they're pretty disgusting. They don't seem to have any morals. They're overrunning her house. They're taking her stuff. They've shown her nothing but disrespect. They're clearly treating her as a possession. I want to marry you, not because you're beautiful, but because I want to be king. And by the way, these are the guys who tried to kill her son. How could she love any one of them? They tried to kill her son. So clearly, that's an argument for not marrying, right? And finally, she also mentions that the townspeople don't want her to remarry. So do I do what the suitors want and what my son wants? Or do I do what my heart tells me and what the people want me to do as well? So she's really suffering trying to make this decision. But at last she has decided that it is time for her to remarry, as she told the suitors. So she tells Odysseus that she's got this great plan. She's going to hold a contest the next day. And the contest is going to involve shooting an arrow with one of his bows, one of Odysseus's bows, through a line of 12 axes. The idea will be that they'll bury the axes head down so that the handles are sticking up. There'll be 2 rows fairly close together. And it's hard to shoot an arrow that straight that wouldn't veer outside the channel. So she says, whoever can achieve this challenge, that's the man that I will marry. And then she goes back upstairs and leaves Odysseus alone. They've made up a bed for him on the porch, and that's where he's going to spend the night. That's the end of chapter 19 and the end of this segment. Please come back for part 3.